Hello, welcome to this week's podcast, Revenge of the Normies, Part 3A. Media matters. No amount of faith in the mainstream media survives first contact with the mainstream media, Konstantin Kisin told us this week, and he has the tapes to prove it. If you're not familiar with him, Kisin is a Russian who immigrated to the UK as a teenager. He has since become a British citizen and built a life and a family in his adopted country. He has distinguished himself as a debater a few years ago at Oxford. He is also a published author and successful podcaster. His personal experience with communism in the Soviet Union, where he grew up, and democracy in the West makes him uniquely qualified to speak on the realities of both. Although he is often accused of being on the far right, he considers himself a liberal who is now, quote, politically non-binary. His fame has brought with it some interesting brushes with the media, and though I don't wish to plagiarize his material, what he said this week is the best context for the topic I wish to discuss, so I will use his insights to provide that context. The objective of journalists is no longer to seek out and report the truth. It is to advance an agenda, their agenda. The proper way of doing things, be it science or forming opinions or anything else, is to look at the evidence and then arrive at a conclusion. You don't arrive at your conclusion and then look for the evidence that supports it. That is the exact opposite of the scientific method and indeed of reason. Isaac Newton did not come up with the theory of gravity and then look around for something to prove the theory he made up out of thin air. He saw an apple fall and began contemplating what could be the force that causes that to happen. Evidence first, conclusions after. That is what journalism is supposed to be. But that is not what it is any longer. The following is a transcript I have made of a phone call from an NBC journalist to Konstantin Kisin. I am providing it in its entirety only so you can see that nothing is being spun. You can go listen for yourself to see if it is accurate. The only thing I have removed are the many from the reporter, just to save time. If you skip ahead to the next section partway through, that is fine. This conversation is, however, a perfect example of the now typical agenda of journalists to create the story they want and then try to create the evidence to support it. Their job actually is to go out and collect the evidence without any agenda and then report the story they have uncovered, whatever that may be. They have forgotten what their job is. And we, in turn, can no longer trust them. Reporter. Hello, how are you? Kisin. I'm fantastic, how are you? Reporter. I'm also fantastic. It's almost the weekend. Thank you for making time to speak with me. Kisin. Sure. Reporter. Yeah, so, he, meaning Elon Musk, made a tweet from, I think it was from like October, where it was right after a terrorist attack by Hamas on Israel. There were protests in Europe, some of them supporting Palestinians. Again, you were tweeting about that, and then Musk responded to you, if current trends continue, civil war in Europe is inevitable. And then, of course, he tweeted something similar about a week ago and got into this back and forth with Keir Starmer and others on sort of a similar subject of whether civil war in Europe is inevitable. But that same word again, inevitable. And really, I'm just sort of curious about your reaction to sort of issues, sort of repeated predictions, and I guess that a civil war is inevitable. Do you think it's accurate? Do you think he's onto something? Do you disagree? Or what's your reaction, I guess? Kisin. He's 100% right. Reporter. What do you think What do you think that would look like? Kissing. I don't think anybody knows. What we do know is if this continues, then there will be, I don't know if civil war is necessarily the way that it will go. No one knows how these things go in history, but the fact that he's pointing to the very simple observation that societies in many European countries are incredibly divided, economically stagnant, have imported large numbers of people from a completely different culture and religion, and the demographic side of these conversations obviously matters as well. If you put all that together and you play the movie forward, it's not an unreasonable prediction. Nobody knows how the future will pan out, but based on what we are seeing with our own eyes now, it's quite possible. Reporter. Okay. You know, I guess about 10 months or so have passed since Musk tweeted that. I think we're in a civil war now, but do you think we are? And if we're not, you know, at what point do you say that Musk was wrong about that, if ever? Or, Kissin, sorry, are you under the impression that Elon Musk is suggesting that a civil war is imminent? Reporter, he did not use the word imminent. Kissin, no. And he doesn't mean imminent. He said on current trends. So he's talking about very long-term trends that happen over a long period of time. Nobody knows whether it will happen 10 years from now or 30 years from now, and no one's able to predict that. What he's looking at is the direction of travel. And what he's saying, if you go to New York and you drive west from New York, eventually you're going to get to California. That's all he's saying. Reporter. Yeah. Kissin. Right. So when you ask me, forgive me, I'm not being rude, but I don't understand how you can ask me if I think we're in a civil war now. Obviously not. A civil war would look like tens of thousands of people killing each other on a daily basis. We're obviously not in that position, and no one is saying that we are. And by the way, something I think it's important for you to remember is that when we talked about those comments he made 10 months ago, you said there was some people who were protesting for the Palestinians. Actually, the thing that many of us were reacting to at the time was the fact that there were protests on the streets of major European cities before Israel had even retaliated. So they were not there to protest for Palestine. They were there to celebrate the mass slaughter that had just taken place in Israel. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. My comment interjected, good man Constantine, don't let him BS the dark reality that went on. Reporter, that's fair for sure. Do you think Musk is using the term civil war in a sort of classic sense of civil war, where there's a rebel group that is seeking to overthrow the government? Or is he speaking just more generally about street violence or terrorist attacks or other kinds of political violence? My comment, could he be fishing for something that he can frame as a threat more? Kissin, I have absolutely no idea. You're going to have to ask him. Long pause. Reporter, do you think there will be like a rebel group that is armed and organized and trying to overthrow the UK government? Kissin, I have absolutely no idea. As I said to you earlier, nobody knows what exactly it's going to look like. In the metaphor I gave you, when you drive west from New York, you will eventually get to California. But how exactly you're going to get there, which road you're going to take, what is going to happen to you on the way, etc., nobody knows. What Elon Musk is doing is pointing out the fact that Europe is moving in a particular direction on demographics, on economics, on multiculturalism, and these are all perfectly valid points. Doesn't mean he knows or is able to predict exactly how it's going to pan out. Nobody can. Long pause. Reporter, right. But what I'm saying, a civil war by definition is a rebel, an armed rebel group. Kissin, no, No, it's not. Not even remotely, by definition, is a civil war that. A civil war is two people, two groups of people within one society fighting each other on a national scale. Reporter. But I think by definition, one of those sides is going to be the incumbent government. Kissin. I don't know why you know that. We have absolutely no idea what it could or couldn't look like in the future. Reporter. I mean, if you look up, any definition of civil war in academic literature, it is incumbent government battling as a belligerent, battling at least one armed rebel group. Kissin. Well, the rebelliousness of the group or otherwise, it's kind of a historical issue, right? There are some people, some civil wars that were won by the people you might describe as a rebel group. They wouldn't consider themselves as a rebel group. They would consider themselves a portion of society that had a problem with the other portion of society. My personal interjection. Yeah, the American Revolution would be a perfect example of that. Were the Founding Fathers a rebel group from their point of view? From the British point of view, maybe, but from their point of view? Kissin. I don't understand why we're getting bogged down on this. Reporter. Well, because he used this term, specifically, civil war, and as you're somebody who agrees with him, do you think that, are the immigrants going to arm themselves and organize and overthrow Westminster? Kissin. The immigrants. Reporter. Or the other way around. Kissin. I am an immigrant myself. What are you talking about? Reporter. Well, I'm trying to understand the prediction of a civil war. Kissin. Okay. Reporter. And Kissin. Elon Musk is an immigrant to America. Are you seriously suggesting that he's concerned about immigrants taking up arms against the government? Reporter. I'm trying to understand what. At this point, he mumbles unintelligibly. So he tweeted about this 8 times in the past year. Kissin. Yeah? Reporter. Saying that we're headed to a civil war. Civil war is inevitable. And generally, what people mean by a civil war is that there is an armed group. It wants to overthrow the government. So, or I guess a secession type situation. And who would be the belligerent, I guess, is the question. Kissin. I don't know. As I said to you repeatedly, but quite often, civil wars, as you said yourself, happen in the situations of secession, when there isn't a widely accepted particular government. So, civil war is a term that people use that covers quite a number of eventualities, but most of all, I don't understand why you're asking me what Elon Musk may or may not think. Reporter. Well, because you were in a conversation with him on Kissin. Okay. Reporter. And I think your reply actually was that civil war implies someone will fight back. Based on the current evidence, I'm not sure that will happen. Kissin. Right. This is my comment. So now he's concerned that Constantine predicted a non-violent civil war? Yes, that is truly concerning. Reporter. I guess, let me ask you this. Who do you think should fight back? Kissin. Forgive me, are you under the impression that either I or Elon Musk want a civil war? Reporter. No. Kissin. So then why would you ask me who I think should fight back? I don't think anyone should fight back because I don't want a civil war. I don't want anyone to be fighting anyone. Reporter: okay. So I guess who would fight back? Kissin: it depends on who would be doing the attacking. I have no idea. Reporter: okay. All right. I'm trying to think if I have any other questions for you. Kissin: okay. Reporter: do you think that Musk, by talking about this as often as he has, is he increasing the risk of violence? Kissin: I think he's decreasing the risk of violence because what he's attempting to do, in exactly the way that I'm attempting to do, is to say to people, do not carry on driving off the cliff. This is not a good thing to do, because if we keep doing that, we're going to end up in a worse place. So if people actually pay attention and listen to people like him and take that into account and start acting differently and implementing different kinds of policies, that would massively reduce the risk of a civil war, which is precisely what he is trying to do, to reduce that risk when he's predicting that it will happen if we carry on down the path that we're going. My comment is, the low intelligence of this line of questioning from this reporter shouldn't have to even be addressed, but since so many reporters have similar low intelligence arguments and are making similarly stupid insinuations, I will point out that Constantine is right. Pointing out that you are about to drive off a cliff does not make you more likely to drive off the cliff. It's not as though the cliff will disappear if you don't talk about it. Talking about it is not what makes it happen. If anything, talking about it gives the driver a warning. It is the only chance that you can avoid driving off the cliff that the driver is heading towards. I can't believe we actually have to say these things. Reporter: what do you think the demographics of the UK should be? Kissin: excuse me? Reporter: what do you think the demographics of the UK should be? Once again, my insertion into this. So, having failed to get a threat, we're now fishing for racism. I have no idea how Constantine kept his cool with this guy who can't even keep it in his little pea brain that he is talking to a Russian immigrant. So why would Constantine, of all people, be prejudiced against immigrants? Or Elon, for that matter? Kissin: I don't understand the question. Reporter: you mentioned earlier about how a lot of this was about demographics. Kissin: yeah. Reporter: changing demographics. Kissin: yeah. Reporter: should the demographics remain the same, or what should the government policy be about demographics? My question is, does any government on the planet have a policy about what the demographics of their country is allowed to be? Kissin: I don't know that the government has a policy about demographics, nor am I suggesting that there should be one. What I'm saying to you is, when you have groups of people who don't share a culture living in the same space, in which their sense of national identity is being eroded, and they're not encouraged to think of themselves as British first and everything else second, or American first and everything else second, you create the potential for interethnic violence. And we already have it on the streets of Britain. And it's not just white people or Muslims. It's Muslims versus Sikhs, Muslims versus Hindus, etc., etc. And so, when you have large numbers of people come to a place in a small period of time, from different cultural backgrounds, who may not even speak the same language, who don't share the same religion, it is natural that those tensions are going to be there. It's not a question of what I think should be the demographic. What we're pointing out is a policy of open door, mass immigration combined with a policy where we have 40,000 people coming into the country illegally every year is not working. That's the point we're making. It's not a question of should it be that or should it be this. It's a point that when you do this, the inevitable outcome is interethnic tension. Reporter: Okay. Could you elaborate at all on the sort of cultural, I forget the phrase we were just using about the culture of people who are arriving, immigrants and refugees? It sounds like you think they're not a good fit for the existing culture of the UK. Constantine: It's not that they are not a good fit. It's that different cultures are different. They have different values. They have different levels of compatibility. It's not that one is necessarily bad, although some cultures are worse than others for sure. It's the fact that coexisting together takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort. And in a society that's increasingly fails to do that, does not encourage people to integrate, does not encourage them to live with other people who are not like them, but rather allows them to live in pockets in which they don't actually engage with the broader British public, that can cause tensions, and it already is. Reporter: So what specifically should immigrants do to assimilate or integrate more that they're not currently doing? Kissin: Well, as a very simple example, I used to live in a part of East London that I think is over 40% Bangladeshi. When I went to my doctor in that area, I was given a leaflet. It had been translated into about 50 languages. So what that tells me is there are quite a lot of people living in that area, as there are in many other parts of the UK, that don't even bother to learn the language. They're not being encouraged or helped to do so. It's very difficult to integrate with other people when you don't even have a common language. Reporter: Okay. Anything else on the subject that you'd like to add? Kissin: Only that I think your line of questioning is very strange. Like, Elon Musk is not saying anything other than we should not pursue policies that are bad for our country. That includes bad for the people on all sides of every cultural difference and everything else. A country that has strife is a bad place to be for everybody. And what he's attempting to do is to encourage people in Europe not to go down that path. Reporter: Let me give you a little more context of what I'm writing about. So I've been asking other people about Musk's predictions of a civil war. Spoke to one person who said that it was a dog whistle, a sort of coded language about race, and that Musk is, although he doesn't explicitly call for civil war, that rhetorically there's little difference between repeatedly predicting one, saying it's unavoidable, and Kissin, he's not saying, this is the difference, he's not saying it's unavoidable. He said the exact opposite. He said, if we continue to do what we're doing, that's the same as someone saying, if we continue to drive off this cliff, we're going to fall off of it. It's not the same as wanting us to fall off the cliff. On the contrary, it's an he's imploring us not to drive off the cliff. So that, I think, is important to say. Then the other point, just to finish what I'm saying on this idea that he's concerned about the race of the people involved, Elon Musk is on record saying repeatedly that he is pro more immigration as long as it's legal and beneficial to the host country. My comment as a total side note. I am so sick of this dog whistle accusation. It's just another way of saying there's nothing wrong with what you said that we can pick apart. So we're going to claim the ability to read your mind and claim that what you really meant was wrong. It's ludicrous and should be dismissed with mockery every time it's used. Long pause. Reporter. Now, so I have a couple of points there. So when he tweeted at you last October, he said, if current trends continue, but more recently he has not included that qualification. He has just said, at this point he becomes unintelligible again, a tweet a couple of weeks ago when, quote, civil war is inevitable. Kissin. Yeah. Reporter. Which makes it, he's not qualifying it. He's saying it is inevitable. This is me again. So now the problem is that he doesn't tweet 20 qualifications that he has tweeted 100 times before, every time before he says anything new. Kissin. Well, yeah. If you take those two things together, what I think he's saying is, I've been warning about this for many, many years, as he has been, as I have been, and when you see riots of the scale and nature that we just saw in the UK, when you see hundreds of armed men, both white thugs and Muslim thugs on the streets of the same cities attempting to fight each other, that is yet another sign that we're heading down the wrong track. So, if he is now convinced that, given the current government that we have, the broader direction of travel in the UK, culturally and politically, right? We've just had 14 years of a conservative government. It hasn't done anything about any of these issues, and in fact, has made them worse. So if you take comparison with what he was talking about, and now, he could be thinking, this is continuing to get worse, and I just don't see anyone on the political scene who is going to turn this around. And if that's how he's thinking, again, he's 100% right. Reporter. Okay. One other thing. Speaking about the recent violence in the UK, most of it was perpetrated by anti-immigrant forces. Should we be more concerned about violence on them, by them, or more concerned about violence by immigrants? This is my injection once more. My answer to that is, based off of this one incident, it looks about even. If, however, you don't limit your vision down to the period that most suits your narrative, and you look back over the past couple of decades, why do you ask that question to the thousands of children who are victims of the rape gangs? Why don't you ask the people who got their throats slit on London Bridge? Why don't you ask Sir David Amos? Why don't you ask the victims at the Ariana Grande concert? Why don't you ask the teacher that's still living in hiding over a cartoon? Why don't you ask the 4,895 women who were raped on New Year's Eve in Sweden in 2017? Or are we only going to count the last few days because that's the only evidence that fits the story you want to tell? Kissin. I do not understand why you keep framing this as immigrants. Reporter. Migration. Refugees. Then he starts mumbling unintelligibly again. Kissin. No. The violence was not when I said there were gangs on the street with knives attacking people, it was not Portuguese people, or Ukrainians, or Hong Kongers. Most of those people were British-born. They're not immigrants. Reporter. So I guess my question is, the critics of, do you think one side is more likely to turn violent than another in the immigration debate? This is, once again, my comment. He just doesn't have the basic intelligence to let go of his own inaccurate framing, because that's what his whole narrative is built on. He can't let it go. That's the story he wants to tell, and he's like a dog with a bone. Kissing. Well, as I just explained to you, that we just saw on the streets that there is a willingness on both sides to become aggressive and threatening and to carry weapons, right? So yes, in this particular instance, those rioters were anti-immigration, a lot of them. And many of them would have just been there because they like to burn things down and blow shit up, because they don't have a job, right? Reporter. Okay. People are burning down mosques. Kissing. I don't believe anyone burned down a mosque, no. Long pause. Reporter. I think if you look up, okay, fine. Long pause. Kissing. Let me look it up right now. Then there's a long silence while he does that. Yes, so nobody burned down a mosque. You really should check your facts. Long pause. Reporter. Then maybe an attack on a mosque is a more accurate term. They did not burn down, but there were attacks on a mosque. Kissing. Yeah, people threatened mostly to burn down a mosque, which is a terrible thing to do. Reporter. You're right. Kissing. But we also had riots the week prior, which were immigrant-descended people burning down police cars and police buses, etc. So this is the point I'm trying to make to you repeatedly. There's violence happening from different areas, and that is what Elon Musk is concerned about. He's not saying this particular one group is the threat, and we must all focus on it. He's saying the situation overall, it's not a good situation. Me. This is like watching Bambi try to learn to walk. Reporter. Do you think So, one reason that I called you is because Elon Musk hasn't really spoken about this. He had these sporadic tweets predicting a civil war, but he hasn't really spoken in depth, I don't believe, about this idea. Have you heard him talk in detail about this, or do you think he should? This is me again. So by talking about it 8 times out of however many tweets Elon Musk has made this year, he's making it more likely to happen. So now your question is, so why isn't he talking about it more? Wow. Kissing. I don't know Elon Musk personally, so I've only heard what you've heard. Reporter. Okay. Well, to be clear, I have also reached out to him asking for clarification on what he means when he says, when he's predicting a civil war, and Kissing. Given some of the questions you've been asking me, I'm not positive that he's going to want to speak to you. You don't seem like you're coming at this from an angle of curiosity. You seem like you've already got a story and you're just trying to write that story. Reporter. Which question do you mean specifically? Kissing. Most of the questions you've asked me. Reporter. I mean, I apologize if you got that impression, but my intent is I feel like I've been asking very open-ended questions about Kissing. No. You've been suggesting answers you've been asking me, is it about this? Or is it because he's concerned about race? Or is it because of immigrants? Or whatever, right? Which is completely misframing this entire conversation. And you keep putting things to me like, some idiot told you that Elon Musk wants a civil war? What a moronic thing to say. Why would you even bring that up? Do you honestly think Elon Musk wants people to be murdering each other en masse in Europe? That's what Elon Musk wants? Reporter. Now you're putting words in my mouth. Kissing. Am I? Reporter. Yeah, I did not. Kissing. You said to me, I've spoken to somebody who said this is a dog whistle, and this is what he's trying to say it because he wants that outcome. He's trying to encourage violence. Long pause. Reporter, I quoted that to you because, Kissen, I know. Why? Why would you quote some idiot? Why would you even include that in your conversation of the story? That's a preposterous thing to assume about somebody. Reporter, an expert in extremism and political violence who works at a university. This is my comment. Oh, so he's a college-educated idiot. So? Kissen. So what? It's a preposterous thing to suggest. You think Elon Musk, whose mission is to build spaceships to take us to another planet for the sole reason that we could preserve humanity across multiple planets, that guy, what he deeply, deeply wants is a civil war in Europe? That's what he's trying to encourage? And just because this person went to university, you think that makes that a legitimate point of view? It's absurd. Reporter, I mean, the question I'm trying to answer is, why does Elon Musk spend so much time reading and thinking about civil war? Me. Better question. Why do you spend so much time reading and thinking about Elon Musk's tweets? Kissen. Because he's really, really concerned about it. Long pause. Reporter. Okay. Well, that's my question, really, is why is he doing that? And actually, I think you've given me an answer. Kissen, so do I. Now, I don't want you to dismiss this conversation as an anomaly with one weird and dishonest reporter. So I'm going to include an excerpt of what Kissen had to say about the way they were similarly attacking Douglas Murray for having predicted the present-day situation in a failed attempt to prevent it via his warnings. Let's shoot the messenger, Kissen joked. In a book appropriately titled, Is Reality Optional?, Thomas Sowell once wrote, "People will forgive you for being wrong, but they will never forgive you for being right, especially if events prove you right while proving them wrong." It is therefore unsurprising that in the wake of the violent riots that have shaken Britain in recent days, the people who predicted all of this are in the crosshairs. Over the weekend, Alistair Campbell suggested that the police should investigate Douglas Murray for writing and promoting The Strange Death of Europe. Campbell is supposedly a mental health campaigner. He was known for screaming at underlings during his time in Downing Street. By the way, Malcolm Tucker from The Thick of It was based on Alistair Campbell, and is currently positioning himself as the voice of Britain's moral conscience. He was the spin doctor, you'll remember, who helped Tony Blair lie the country into invading Iraq, causing the death of hundreds of thousands of people. All of this, I'm quoting Constantine, so I don't want people to think this is me, this is him. I would not want to take credit for, what he is intelligent enough to argue. Murray's great crime, on the other hand, is writing a book which predicted, with great accuracy, everything that is happening across our continent today. And the people who ignored and dismissed him have the audacity to blame him for what is happening instead of themselves. As you know, I'm rarely lost for words, but the hypocrisy on display here is stunning. Let me therefore condemn myself to a place in the cell next to Douglas Murray by sharing with you again the preface to my book written over 3 years ago now. If you're interested in that book, it's called An Immigrant's Love Letter to the West. It's very good. The Gur-a-Amir Mausoleum stands in the heart of the ancient city of Samarkand in modern-day Uzbekistan. The magnificent structure, known colloquially as Tomb of the Commander, was built to preserve the remains of Tamerlane, a terrifying conqueror who modeled himself on Genghis Khan. His tomb is inscribed with the words, "When I rise from the dead, the whole world shall tremble." On the 21st of June, 1941, Soviet anthropologists led by Mikhail Gerasimov opened the tomb on the orders of Joseph Stalin and began exhuming Tamerlane's body. As the scent of frankincense, rose, camphor, and resin filled the air, Gerasimov and his team discovered an additional inscription inside the casket. "Whoever disturbs my tomb will unleash an invader more terrible than I." The following morning, Adolf Hitler's Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union. The history of humanity is a series of unopened tombs, which hold not only the stories of our past, but also stark warnings about our future. As I write this in January 2021, the West is suffering from a global pandemic. COVID-19, a virus of the body, has brought devastation to millions of people around the world and forced our governments into unprecedented measures whose consequences will become apparent in the years to come. The virus and our zealous response have ravaged the global economy, deprived us of our civil liberties, and caused untold damage in every area of our lives. But another devastating epidemic has spread like wildfire through the Western world, particularly the Anglosphere, and shows no signs of abating. Unlike COVID, this is a virus of the mind. If you're fortunate enough to have avoided Twitter, do not work in a progressive industry, and are not a recent graduate, your awareness of this virus may be peripheral. You may not yet be familiar with terms like critical race theory, social justice, and wokeness. I envy you. But even so, if you're reading this book, you've likely spotted that the world around us is changing at an unprecedented speed. You may have noticed a dramatic change in tone of our public discord. Nearly 2/3 of Americans now say that they fear expressing their political views, including a majority of Democrats at 52%, Independents at 59%, and Republicans at 77%. In Britain, nearly half of us feel less free to speak our minds, while only 20% feel more free to do so than we did a few years ago. Perhaps you've watched in confusion as men and women have been positioned not as partners, but as opponents in some kind of battle of the sexes. It may have struck you that our conversations about race have become a way to separate us rather than bring us together. You may have watched in confusion as statues of historical figures were defaced or torn down by angry mobs. Perhaps your employer brought in someone to explain that being white imbues you with some sort of original sin, or that being black or brown makes you a victim of life. You may even have been on the right side of these issues for years. Perhaps you thought that only bigots worried about expressing their problematic beliefs, that men are toxic and white people should atone for the terrible crimes of their ancestors and their inherited privileges in society. You may have spent your life supporting progressive causes, giving money to charities for disadvantaged groups, and being on, quote, the right side of history. And yet, as J.K. Rowling discovered, your belief in basic biology may be your undoing nonetheless. Even if you're fortunate enough to have avoided direct contact with these issues, you may have noticed an odd feeling. What it is, you can't explain exactly, and for now, it is relatively easy to ignore. As you busy yourself with daily life, you reassure yourself that things can only get better. And yet, in those rare moments of reflection, you cannot help feeling a sense of foreboding. It is hard to put into words how you know this, but someone, somewhere, has opened another accursed tomb. The initial phases of Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union, which began on the 22nd of June, 1941, were a huge success. German armored formations, which had blitzkrieged their way through France, Belgium, and the Netherlands in 1940, were now speeding toward Moscow, crushing disorganized Soviet resistance as they went. My great-grandfather, who had just returned home from the Winter War with Finland, was thrown into the meat grinder of the Eastern Front, along with millions of others, to stop the German advance. Like him, most of them never returned. If you've ever traveled from Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport into the city, you may have noticed 3 odd-looking metal structures along the road. These anti-tank obstacles mark how close the enemy came to taking the city. Across the entire front, the Soviet Union fought for its survival. Nowhere was the war more intense than at Stalingrad. Fierce fighting in the city went on for months, with Stalin sacrificing more and more men and materials in recognition of the simple fact: retreat was no longer an option. As the Battle of Stalingrad hung in the balance, on the 20th of December, 1942, the body of Tamerlane was returned to his tomb and given a full Islamic burial. Within days, the Soviet Union mounted a successful counterattack at Stalingrad and went on an offensive that would not stop until it reached Berlin, saving the world from Nazi domination. Today, the fate of Western civilization hangs in the balance once again. The tomb of discord and division has been forced open by a small group of ideological zealots. Retreat is no longer an option. Either we bury the hatchet and heal, or the whole world shall tremble once more. End quote. Besides being fascinating, why do I think these stories about media and political corruption are important? It is important because a very high-stakes game is being played right now. And if you are unaware of the battle lines being drawn, we're going to be cannon fodder. That may sound dramatic, but if you've ever read history, then you know the world is a dramatic place. Hustlers have been elected to office and have become politicians, and they have enlisted the media as their own propagandists. If you listen to them unaware of this, you will likely fall prey to the narratives they are telling. That has never been a more important danger than right now. The world is at a tipping point. We can all feel it. And if we make the wrong choice about which direction to head in, the results could be devastating, possibly unrepairable. If we can't even depend on the media to be honest, where does that leave us? This was just a prelude into the main example of the media's corruption and deception. The heart of this series concludes with a hard look at the death of George Floyd and the BLM riots that devastated the nation. Thank you for listening to this week's podcast, and I very much hope you will come back next week for its conclusion. It will be a continuation of this podcast, but it's the point we've been building to, so you don't want to miss it. I really hope you come back. Thank you. Talk to you next week.